Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us for our study session this evening. Tonight we'll be discussing Goal 2, which covers responsible, resilient, and empathetic learners. So Dr. Reed, would you like to introduce us?
Yeah, thank you, President Swain. And it's my pleasure to introduce Assistant Superintendent Michael Tolley, who is responsible for coordinating the presentation on Goal 2, and he will introduce the team he has brought with him and begin our presentation. So thank you, Michael.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Reed. I think I'm going to try to share my screen here. Okay, of course, someone has to stop sharing the current screen so I can take over. But while that's happening, I would like to introduce the members of my team who's going to be presenting this evening. We have Adria Davey, who's our Director for Special Education in the North Region. Catherine Lamb, who's a counselor at Woodinville High School. We also have Kendra Lowe, who's a counselor at North Shore Middle School. We have with us Stephen Wallinger, who is a counselor at both Cottage Lake and East Ridge Elementary Schools. Rick Farrell, our Director of Student Services. And of course, we also have our Assistant Superintendent for the West Region, David Wellington, with us. So we will all be involved in presenting information this evening. So I believe now I can be able to share my screen. And
there it goes.
There we go. So again, as mentioned, this is a school board study session for Strategic Plan Goal 2. And of course, our purpose here this evening is to provide an update to the school board members on the measures within Goal 2 of our North Shore Strategic Plan. Generally, this goal is focused on developing our students into responsible, resilient, and empathetic leaders. And the descriptions, as we read it, both the description here as well as what equity means, it's clear that it's directly aligned with our efforts to increase inclusionary practices within our school district. And for that reason, at one point, we thought we would actually take an opportunity this evening during this study session and to provide the school board an update on those efforts. However, our decision was to actually provide some introductory information this evening in preparation for a future study session that would be focused on how we are implementing inclusionary practices within North Shore School District. And for that reason, we've asked Adria Davey to come this evening and provide that introductory information to the school board. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Adria.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here to provide this information for all of you. When Michael asked me to do this, we started thinking about what would be the most important pieces to lay the groundwork for a future study session on the inclusionary practices within the district. And so I'm going to try to answer 3 questions today. One is, what is the IPP, is what we've been calling it. Why did the state decide to start the IPP, and how is North Shore participating currently in the IPP? So I actually had to look up what it was called because I've been calling it the IPP for 2 years and I knew it had a really long name and not all the P's were included in there. So it's actually called the Inclusionary Practices Professional Development Project. I'm sure you can see why we reduced it down to IPP. But what happened is the legislature provided OSPI with $25 million over 2 years to support professional development in the area of inclusionary practices. So the OSPI Special Education Division has partnered with schools and districts and professional development providers to help increase inclusionary practices across the state. So far, they have 246 schools, 100 districts, and impacting over about 20,000 students with disabilities statewide. Michael, if you could forward. Ooh. And So why did the state start this foray, if you will, into inclusionary practices? In 2018, there was a report released by the National Council on Disability called The Segregation of Students with Disabilities. And in that report, Washington State was 43rd in the nation for inclusionary practices, making it really like the 8th most restrictive state in the nation. At that time, only 54% of students with disabilities statewide were in general education settings for 80 to 100% of the day, meaning they were not in general education settings for 80% or for, how am I saying this? Mr. Tully, help me out.
Yeah.
So they were more restricted. So for more than 79% of their day, they were out of general ed settings within special ed settings. And there's a large body of research that consistently supports that students with and students without disabilities actually have better outcomes when students with disabilities are included in the gen ed setting. And it has a lot to do with that feeling and sense of belonging within your community. And a school really is a community, and all students need to feel that sense of belonging within the general ed setting and the school community. So Washington State set out to kind of make this a more inclusive state, if you will. Their goal by the end of the inclusionary practices pilot was by the spring of 2021 that 60% of students would be receiving their services in a fully inclusive in the gen ed setting. And they've already reached that goal. So it's working. If you'll advance to the next slide there. So how are we participating? So when the project started in the 1920 school year, we had 3 schools that were selected by the state to participate: Woodinville High School, North Creek High School, and Leona Middle School, because of their data around least restrictive environment. In the special ed world, we call that LRE, but what that means is we have 3 categories of least restrictive environment. LRE 1 means students are spending 80 to 100% of their school day in a gen ed setting. LRE 2 means they're spending 40 to 79% of their school day in a gen ed setting. And 3 is 0 to 39% of their school day in a gen ed setting. Those 3 schools were chosen because their metrics showed that their LRE 2 percentage was actually higher than their LRE 1 percentage. In other words, they had a higher percentage of their special education students spending 40 to 79% of their day in gen ed settings than they did in the 80 to 100% category. So they all chose to participate and started in on this work. In the 2021 school year, Kokanee and Ruby Bridges were both selected as demonstration sites for inclusive practices, meaning that they are sites that schools can visit virtually right now to learn more about how to pull these inclusive practices off the page. In addition, all of the schools within the North region, along with North Shore Middle School, applied and were awarded into the grant, and all those funds are being targeted for professional development toward inclusive practices. And I think that's all I have.
Yes. Well, thank you, Adrian. And again, the intent is for there to be a future study session on this topic. We just wanted to provide, as Dr. Reed mentioned earlier, a teaser as to what we will be talking about at a later date.
So Assistant Superintendent Tolley, I wonder if the board has any questions or comments for Assistant Director Davey at this time, or Director Davey at this time.
Thank you, Superintendent Reed. And then thank you for saying that it's a teaser. So I just have one quick question, but I can't wait for the study session. I think this is amazing work, and would love to hear more. It seems like it's really taken off, and I just love it. I just love it. But really quickly, so AJ, when I think of inclusion and bringing students into a better environment, I think physical classrooms, right? Moving from a learning center or another classroom into a gen ed classroom. So how does this look in the virtual realm that we find ourselves in today?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. And I think what what we're aiming for is students to be with their gen ed peers in the gen ed setting as much as possible. And so they're participating with their gen ed teacher in the virtual setting. In the physical setting, it would be actually in the classroom, but in the virtual setting, it's within the gen ed teacher's virtual environment.
Thanks very much. That helps. And I assume with perhaps a co-teacher or something like that who is also in the virtual environment with them.
Yes, and I think at the next session, we'll be talking about some of those very important high leverages practices that we've been starting. Co-teaching is one of them.
Are there any
Follow up with just a quickie, Director Davey, and I'll echo Director Cass. Thank you so much. This is really exciting and kind of well, maybe frustrating because it's only a teaser. I think we're all really excited to see the rest of it. And maybe this will be covered later, but I do wonder if any of the other regions or schools have since been applying to this program, or if it was strictly, one area of the district that was designated.
Yes, that's a great question. So the first year, Woodinville High School was also included, and they're in the East region. And then North Shore Middle School also applied to be part of the grant, and they're in, I think, South, if I've got that right, region. Our region decided to apply as a whole. And I think part of that was because we had 2 schools that were selected by the state in the first place. And some of the work that we were able to do with those 2 schools was really exciting.
Thank you, Director Davey.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you, Adrian. All right, moving on. So as you look at the measures within Goal 2, you will find that each of these measures, in some cases, have multiple components to them. So we're going to do our best to try to address as many of the components within each of these measures as possible with whatever current data is available and examples of what that work looks like within the district currently and as we go forward. We also, as we do this presentation, we will stop at the end of presenting each measure to give opportunity to ask questions. But if at any time you feel that you need to ask a question, please do not hesitate to do so. Before going any further, though, I do want to mention that the primary, or one of the primary sets of data that we will be sharing is Healthy Youth Survey data. The Healthy Youth Survey, as you probably know, is administered every 2 years. As you can see here, the last 2 times that the survey was administered in North Shore, we had pretty good participation among our students. But of course, as you also see, it was the 16-17 school year and the 18-19 school year is the most recent data available through the Healthy Youth Survey. And I'll be honest, this is information that, or data points that was shared with the board last year, but it does provide us some trends to take a look at as we go forward. So beginning with measure 1 within this particular goal, and this is an example of a measure that has a number of components to it. It's not just a measure of students who feel safe, but also who believe they have a sense of belonging, personally meaningful friendships, believe that their school is vibrant and inclusive, and that the rules in the school are administered fairly and equitably. So our attempt here is to try to provide as much information that's available on this. Healthy use, beginning with Healthy Use Survey, students feeling safe. Again, this is administered every 2 years. So this is data from the 16-17 school year and 18-19 school year. What you'll see, students feeling safe. Generally, we have a higher percentage of students who feel safe in our schools when compared to students across the state of Washington. However, you will also note that the feeling of safety has declined, not just in North Shore, but across the state. And as we discussed when we looked at this same data last year, it may be a response to the tragic events that occurred in 2018 in Florida, If you recall the Parkland situation that occurred, it was horrible. That we were thinking may have had an impact on this particular data point. So again, in our efforts to try to provide examples of the work that's going on to address the topics or the components of measure 1 within our goal 2, we have asked our counselors to present information as to what this looks like at the elementary, middle, and high school level. So we'll begin at the elementary level, and Steven Wallinger is going to present this information.
Awesome. Thank you. And good evening, everybody. Thank you for having me tonight. I like to be up front when I'm feeling nervous before a presentation. So I'm feeling a little bit nervous. This is my first time getting in front of a school board, but I'm very happy to be here. So this is a survey that I helped to develop for both Eastridge and Cottage Lake Elementary in partnership with the administrators in both my buildings. We kind of put our heads together to figure out how can we measure these constructs in our goal 2 measure 1 area. And so you can see some examples of the questions that were asked in trying to measure things like a sense of safety, sense of belonging, school feeling inclusive. And then we also included some questions around using strategies and just needing help with technology because this survey was first administered right at the start of the year. So we were trying to capture any sort of gaps that may show up down the road and kind of take care of those sooner rather than later. Next slide, please. And so on this slide, I wanted to include just a couple examples of the questions that as seen by the students. And so I think one kind of tricky part about gathering perception data from elementary students is the developmental considerations and knowing that some of these students are kindergartners and first graders and other are 4th and 5th. And so the ability to comprehend and understand these questions can be difficult to kind of grapple with. So included pictures to try and make it a little bit more kid friendly and to provide some context to the answers that they were giving us on this survey. Next slide, please. And so I did want to save a little bit of time for this slide in particular. So this is after I received the data from the students. I analyzed everything and formatted it in a way so that it would be a little bit more digestible for our teachers. And so this information was presented during a staff meeting. Each teacher, so as you see this here, what you're looking at is this is what a classroom teacher would have gotten for their entire class of students. And so you'll notice student information has been blocked out in here for confidentiality, but just to the left of that big black box on the left of this slide, you would have seen student individual scores for each question. And then what I did was I took the questions and kind of made a more summative view of the data. And that's the color-coded area that you're seeing here. We also did class averages. So not only could classroom teachers identify maybe individual students that were feeling challenged by one or more of these things, but we could also look at it and see if maybe there was more of a classroom theme to it. And maybe there needed to be, these challenges needed to be addressed more from the classroom level than from a one-on-one standpoint. And then you'll see on the right side here, there's some drop-down arrows. And so teachers could identify 2 to 3 students from their class and specifically say which intervention they think would be appropriate. They could also request to schedule a meeting with myself or our administrators in order to maybe brainstorm if they weren't quite sure how to support a certain student. But this made for a really nice kind of streamlined way for us to share and work with this data together. Next slide, please. Thank you. And so I also wanted just to include some outcomes. So what did we do with that data once we had it? And we had a number of students start up with some small group counseling with myself. We have a number of students that joined small groups with other staff members, and those groups were led by our paraeducators, our office staff, school nurse. So really trying to make sure our students are interfacing with as many staff members outside of their classroom teachers as possible. Some individualized incentive plans, some one-on-one counseling. I won't go through reading the whole list, but I will say that we're currently in the process of analyzing and formatting kind of round 2 of this data. So we have a bit of a checkpoint for the mid-year, and we'll do that collection again in the spring to kind of see any trends throughout the school year this year, and just to make sure that we're staying on top of this information and meeting student needs as they occur. Next slide, please. I think actually,
All right. Thank you, Stephen. Such good data. I know at the middle school level, we are just getting our surveys sent out to families and students. So we're looking forward to that good data as well. We are going to share some examples at the middle school level that promote Measure 1. We increase a sense of belonging and meaningful friendships by providing opportunities for peers to work together as leaders, collaborating and connecting. And the bullet on ASB team leaders orientation in the spring, they support our 5th graders as they're coming in, really establishing that warm connection as leaders on our campus and welcoming in our 5th graders. We also have our web leaders, and that is open to all 8th graders that can apply. And then they work as leaders in the fall to support the 6th graders as they transition in, just really building those connections. We also promote that vibrant, safe, and inclusive school through our clubs, our homeroom and advisory lessons, which we'll be talking in more depth coming up, and our Student of the Month celebrations that are a gift to everybody who attends. These are all powerful ways that students feel strong sense of connection and belonging at the middle school level.
Thank you.
Next slide. Yep, thank you. Thank you for having me as well. I wanted to highlight some of the programs at the high school level across the district. One that has been really powerful this year, given our current state, is the Active and Engaged Culture and Climate Student Group. The silver lining to this group this year is that kids are full of comments and questions and want to share their story about themselves, some of the difficulties they've been having with online learning, having conversations around racism. The kids have really supported one another, and they've brought in some amazing speakers. That is one group. At Woodinville, we have continued with our advisory class. So we're in year 3 now. The staff has been assigned to a core group of students. We tried to keep the numbers low. So the principal, assistant principals, counselors, we all took a group. So I have juniors now. I've been with my group for 3 years and have grown super close to them. They're not necessarily students in my part of the alphabet. These kids email me, they have questions, they will reach out for help. We do progress checks with them, and it really keeps them connected to what's happening at school. You know, we're able to deliver announcements, we did registration, I mean, just everything that's happened, and, you know, trying to really support them through virtual learning and keep them connected. You can see the schedule there. That's our Woodinville schedule, weekly schedule. And we have advisory every Tuesday and Friday. So it's a half-hour time. And the kids are attending and talking and sharing as well. Another awesome program is Link Crew at our schools, supporting the transition to high school. So for incoming 9th graders, as well as new students to the school. They're paired with high school students who act as their mentor and role model. We have Student of the Month, where students are acknowledged and recognized for special accomplishments, given a certificate, and just really put you know, on the spotlight. And all of these programs we've continued during remote learning. Next slide.
So we thought we'd pause here for a moment before going to the next measure to see if board members have any questions.
Good too. Thank you all. This is really really great information. With respect to the elementary schools, we had Cottage Lake and Eastridge, I believe. And are there plans for sending this out eventually to all of our elementary schools? And, you know, if I guess I wonder what your thoughts are with respect to, you know, how different you might expect the responses to be if you go to a very different area of the district with these same questions.
Yeah, and I don't know if I can answer your question fully, in part because, well, at least to the first part of the question, as I haven't really talked to anybody about distributing this out anywhere else beyond our 2 buildings. And so I know that we meet weekly as an elementary counselor team, and there has been talks about something like that. We do a lot of material sharing that way. And so I could definitely see that being an avenue to maybe try and further the reach in that way. As far as the variability in responses goes, I'm a brand new counselor to the district this year. And so for context, I don't know a whole lot of information about the schools outside of my own. And so I don't know if I can speak to that as much as maybe someone else might be able to.
And I'll just chime in, Director McGordy. Each school, based upon their own population, they have a different population of students, so they've created their own survey. At some point, we hope that we can just do a more universal survey for all, so they are asked the similar questions, but based on the different and various populations that they have, that's why they've created their own surveys. But hopefully we can do a more universal survey in the future.
Oh, great. Thank you. That explains a lot. Thanks.
Well, I first want to thank you for the three of you being nervous. You did a great job, and the information is so rich and helpful to hear, not only where there's areas concerns, which I think we hear a lot, but also where things are going well. And so to see that work is continuing and the efforts to make sure that all students feel connected is fantastic. Thank you. This is really more for Mr. Farrell and Mr. Tolley. I'm realizing March 1st is next week, and that seemed to be the magic date to use the survey. I think I've heard that it's happening again this year, but do you know? I think I remember it being a paper format 2 years ago, but what is the status of that happening? Do you know?
As far as I know, I think there was a decision at the state level not to administer the Healthy Survey current school year. This would normally be, you're correct, this would normally be the year that it would be administered, the 2021 school year. But my understanding, it was not being administered this year.
Okay, thank you.
And I have a quick question for Ms. Lamb. So the active and engaged group, I noticed it wasn't called a club. It was a student group, correct? So, and how might it different? Is it a larger group of students? Is it organized differently? It sounds like a great resource for students to have. And so I'd just like to understand the scope of it a little better.
Oh, Catherine, you're muted. There you go.
Hi, thank you. I just am aware of my dog in the house. So this, the Active and Engaged Culture and Climate Student Group is basically a club. It is a program out of Bothell High School. So I didn't want to just represent the amazing work we do at Woodinville to connect with our students. So I got a lot of information and was really impressed, and it was actually hard to kind of condense it. They shared about presenters that they have brought in. So it is a club essentially that meets regularly. I think they call it a group instead of, the Climate Student Club. So I think it's just the title.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Thanks very much.
Yeah.
I'd like to just thank our counselors for spending some time this evening with us and presenting, for all the great work that you always do. This has been a year like no other, and thank you for stepping up and taking good care of our students. This connection to school and connection to adults, connections to friends is more critical now than probably ever. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And if I could add just quickly, it's actually good to see you. I mean, we don't have the chance to interact very often. We know you're in there and you're in the trenches doing the good work. So it's really nice to be able to meet you.
I was just curious, do you have a sense of the participation in clubs and groups? Is it similar to in-person, or more kids participating because they're trying to connect? Just curious about that.
I think one thing that we wanted to do when we started this year is bring back some normalcy in the lives of our students. And in the previous year, when we ended school in March, we were working on creating a great online environment for the students. But then when we started this year, we wanted to make sure that since we couldn't come back to face-to-face instruction, that we provided some normalcy in the lives of these kids, get them back involved in clubs and different activities, involved with their peers a little bit more. And that's why there has been a big push for getting all of these clubs started again, just to have them well engaged prior to returning back whenever we do go face-to-face.
But thank you for that, Rick. Really appreciate that.
Thanks,
To
Rick.
follow up on I had the same wondering that President Swain had in terms of just the participation, again, in a remote environment versus typically. Any idea?
Yeah, you know what? I can speak. Am I on mute again? No. Okay. Speak to that. Now I'm paranoid. I actually sought that information on another slide coming up. We also referenced clubs, and one in particular that I reached out to the advisor. It's a club that I have gone to their activities after school. I've been invited to some events and parties that they've had. The Gay Straight Alliance Club. So I reached out to, I'm close to the advisor, and asked him, you know, what has it been like? You know, are the students attending? Are they participating? And he said, yes, definitely. He said, you know, I really wanted when they started the year to find out what the kids wanted to do. You know, how did they want to structure it? He said they really want time to be together virtually. So he said, you know, we talk and we share and just really spend time together. And kids are participating and they are attending and they are showing up. So that was really good to hear. He said, yeah, kind of business as usual. It's just different. And the kids are connected. You know, they need those activities during the week when they're feeling lonely and isolated. And yeah, so we are going to talk about clubs more, and I'm going to brag about how many we have going at Woodinville. We have so many. It's always shocking when I turn new students onto our clubs. Like, look at how many. There's something for everyone. So,
yeah, I would just piggyback on that. Kids are hungry for connection right now, and you'll see the wide range of clubs that we are offering across the district. It is really exciting. And I think some students actually have easier access if they couldn't stay after, like our middle school or high school maybe. If they weren't able to stay after for clubs because they need to get home to help with siblings or had different activities, they can actually log into their Zoom a lot easier, and a lot of sports and outside activities haven't been happening. So it does open up time and access for them, but definitely they're looking for ways to connect.
Thank you.
And I will have to admit that we were pretty ambitious in putting together this presentation this evening, and knowing, being aware of the time, we're going to probably need to move along, and there's so much information to share, and I wish we're going to try to move as quickly as we can through some of these slides. So for measure 2, as you can see, this is another measure that has multiple components to it. We're not just talking about students choosing healthy lifestyles as refers to nutrition, but also exercise, personal care, and safety. And so there are a number of slides from that we've pulled from the Healthy Youth Survey. And again, this is information that was shared with the board last year. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these because we want to get to some of the more specific examples of what it looks like current year, and what are some opportunities to continue that work going forward. So as you can see here, in terms of eating breakfast, we believe that's a very important activity. And you'll find that, yes, on average, our students tend to eat breakfast more so than other students in the state. But as you can also see, that the data the trend data seems to be going slightly in the wrong direction. Come on. The next is around excessive television or video game use. Our students in generally tend to watch television and video games less than other students across the state based on this data. At the same time, though, our physical activity, when you're looking at our students and what was reported in this survey, they are not as active as on average as students across the state. But also we find that the trend of obesity is not as prevalent within our student population as compared to students in the state. They tend to actually, according again to this data, get a little bit more sleep than their peers across the state as well. Rick, I think you wanted to speak to these two.
And what I'll add on this slide, alcohol use on property has definitely gone down. It was a trend from 2016 to 18 that it has gone down. And I will tell you that even with alcohol use on property, and on the next slide, which covers marijuana use on property, one thing that we've tried to incorporate into our mental health services is having mental health therapists that are knowledgeable about drugs and alcohol, so that students can go to that one individual and, rather than being referred out, receive information regarding their mental wellness and alcohol and marijuana use. And I think that's been very helpful for our students.
Yes, thank you. We do want to share some additional information as it relates to current activities or that are going well within our schools to address these components within this measure as well.
Yep, so I'm going to take this slide. We wanted to highlight at the high school level, students are required to take 1.5 credits of PE and a semester of health. So during remote learning, the PE teachers have adapted the curriculum. For example, at Woodinville, the teachers are using a software called PLT4M, which is an app that students download on their phone to assist with the delivery of the virtual lesson. So the program assigns workouts that are tailored to the students' individual needs, and the workouts can be done, as you can see on the slide there, an example, the workouts can be done in the student's living room or through a special course that they design. So the teacher walks them through the lesson and the activity, and it can be done live in class or asynchronously. So they really have, the students are required to take 3 semesters of PE and then a semester of health. So that's really how we, one example of how we're hitting measure 2. And also through the health class, the curriculum covers nutrition, reading labels, making good choices, how to prepare a balanced meal for their family. They have to prepare a meal. You can see, thank you for the next slide. This was an example of the students. These are pictures of one of the meals the student created, and then they serve it to their family, and the parents evaluate them. So there's an example of how that student was evaluated on the meal that they prepared. Within the health classes as well, the curriculum covers topics such as suicide ideation, CPR. They cover depression and anxiety and so much more. So many of these important topics. And then counselors will go in, and the mental health counselor, we go in and support the teachers with some of those lessons, especially the lesson on suicide, the anxiety and depression and so forth. So we wanted to highlight the work of our PE and health teachers with this measure.
And to represent a safe lifestyle, I'm glad to announce that we had one school in the district that was selected to be part of the Work to Be Well program. There weren't too many schools selected within the state, but we do have one within the district, Woodinville High School, which is, we listen to our students as we talk to them and they provide information to Dr. Reed. And one thing that we did here is that some students may not respond to an adult talking to them about mental health. So this program trains students on campus to be trained on mental health science so they can talk to their peers and intervene because not all students may have the courage to go see a counselor or therapist. So this program is just getting off the ground and just getting started, and I'm very excited about what we can actually accomplish with this program within the district.
Yeah, that is exciting. It'd be great to have a middle school model for that as well. All right, transitioning to middle school. What we don't have is our food program at the middle school level, but I know at North Shore, we have our cooking and gourmet foods class, similar to what Kat was saying. And the nutritional piece of this measure is definitely addressed through those electives. But on the screen, you will see the scope and sequence for our health and fitness classes, educating students around a variety of topics. I was just going to highlight 2 on here that I think are powerful and really meaningful for our kids and their overall wellness. If you look at 6th grade, there's the decide process. And this process highlights students' decision-making and how to, gives them a nice, follow the yellow brick road process around making healthy choices. So it has an acronym. The D is for define the decision to be made. E is explore your options. C, consider different consequences for your different choices. I, identify your values, your core values. D, decide or act. And then E, reflect and evaluate. How did that go? How did it work out for you? So I love that that's a part of 6th grade, because then our students can use those skills as their 7th graders and 8th grade and all the way up through high school. But that's really supports this measure. And then the look, listen, link, kind of to Kat's point as well. For 6th grade, they focus on stress and anxiety, tools, how do we manage that to help self-regulate. 7th grade, they focus on suicide and depression. How do we know signs? How do we help ourselves and how do we help our friends when they're struggling with self-harm or suicide ideation or depression? So really important pieces that are part of our conversations at the middle school level as well. And our counseling teams will come in and support. And it just kind of helps normalize it for our students too, to be a part of those lessons and then to support our teachers. And all of these, everything that's listed on there supports mental, physical, and emotional health. And ultimately helping to build our resilient students.
And to represent the healthy lifestyle at the elementary level, some of our schools have adopted Playworks. It's a program where it can be used on campuses if we were face-to-face, but it has been adapted this year for online learning. And what it does is give students and parents and teachers structured activities to not only just have recess, but to just become engaged and to turn recess into more of a leadership and collaborative activity. I recall recess from elementary school where it was just time to go outside, but this is more structured. It provides more information about inclusion, getting our special education students involved. But I'm glad last year we had one school that was involved. This year we had 4. I'm looking for more of our schools to have this involved with their school communities in the future. We had a video, but for the sake of time, I think we're going to move forward.
So at this time, if there are any questions that we might be able to answer.
This, and feel free again, for the sake of time, this is something you're going to cover, but the work to be well and the counseling, is there anywhere it's tracked in terms of numbers of referrals or incidences, again, to try to get an idea, instead of just using kind of, anecdotal information or conjecture in terms of how students are doing and or accessing services? Is there any way that that's tracked? And not the curriculum pieces are lovely, by the way. I guess this is more probably towards the counseling and intervention side, is what I'm wondering.
Yeah, a little bit later in the presentation, we're going to show you some tracking regarding the number of students that have been accessing mental health services at the high school level.
Great, great. And then for Kendra, what you were saying at middle school, this is more like a health class kind of curriculum or during advisory, correct?
That I shared was our health fitness, but we will be talking about advisory.
Great.
And then I think it's the next measure.
Thank you.
Okay, if we go to measure 3, Rick, I think you're going to pick it up here.
Yes, measure 3, increase percentage of students who model a positive social skills and resiliency in a culturally diverse community. So basically, you can go to the next slide. We continue to have our staff trained in trauma-informed care, making sure they understand that students come to us from all walks of life with experiencing different types of trauma, making sure that they are aware of restorative practices. And at the end of the day, these all build social emotional capacity. And on the left side of the course, we definitely celebrate diversity within all of our groups by training our staff and having the racial educational justice groups on each campus. And at the beginning of the year, we knew this year was going to be a challenge, and we couldn't just begin the year and simply start the year by jumping into academics and equations. So we wanted to focus on the beginning of the year of having 10 days of community building, having teachers build strong relations, not only teachers, but all staff build strong relationships with their students before getting into the academics. And at the elementary level, they utilized the second step curriculum. Elementary was familiar with this curriculum, so they worked on different objectives and an overview of different sets of lessons that they would actually carry out with their students. And if they weren't trained on some of these topics, there were staff there, counselors there to help them, even the teachers that were more familiar with it. And some of them have continued with second step even throughout the year. And at the secondary level, we utilize Character Strong for community building. Just try to build and instill a strong sense of community, and making sure that there are different ways to cope with stress and express empathy with one another.
All right. This is where I'm going to get excited, so bear with me. At the middle school level, we have a lot of different opportunities to increase resilience, build those positive social skills, and enrich our culturally diverse community. And Rick just spoke to our Character Strong at the beginning of the year. It was such a lovely way to start with building our community. And it was consistent throughout the middle school level, which was also a real positive thing. So our advisory and homeroom lessons are done weekly, and counselors partner with students and with other teachers to help develop lessons around social emotional concerns, mental health issues. I love the student voice piece of this because they really keep us in check. You know, they make sure that the way we're delivering it is meaningful for their peers and that they can really take away what we want them to take away and connect with the lessons. So them helping to create has been really powerful. You can see some of the topics down on the bottom that we've covered so far this year across the district in our middle schools. And all of these are skills that are so important in a normal time. So then you look at this last year that we've all gone through together, and it just makes it even more meaningful to make sure that our students have these skills and strategies. And what's awesome about homeroom and advisory is that it's a tier 1, accessible for all of our students, but it's embedded into our schedule, right? So everybody's getting it. We normalize these concepts and these conversations as we're being taught. And then teachers can take the information lessons from Monday that all students received, the same lesson, and embed it in their core curriculum throughout the week. And it just provides those rich opportunities for kids to really connect to their learning with these really important social and emotional skills. So on the right, we have our racial and educational justice lessons. The REJ teams have also helped. And if you want to advance this slide, we can see some examples from Skyview where REJ teams have helped to develop lessons that are shared during their homeroom. And they've pulled through Character Strong on this too. But you can see they talked about self-love and caring for yourself, and then power and privilege. So really rich conversations happening. And what's key that Rick touched on earlier was we spent those first few weeks, really that first month, connecting and building that strong community that's safe, and then allows opportunities for kids to be more vulnerable and honest in these conversations. So very exciting work. On the next slide, actually, you can just kind of bump to the next one too. These are just examples of advisory. The slide before was a video, but we're minding our time. So it's on inclusion. The students created it. They talked through what is inclusion. And then every teacher opened up this Google Doc. So all of our classes were on this Google Doc clarifying, what does inclusion look like? What does it sound like? What does it feel like within our building? And that's like in this, that's live, right? How do we make people feel included in this virtual world? So it was really neat. You could see it being populated by other teachers while their class was adding, and just really reinforced that sense of community through our advisory lessons. Thank you. Ooh, and then here's our clubs. Again, when we started polling and asking it across all of our colleagues, like, okay, what clubs do you guys offer? So keep in mind, like when we're looking at the middle school clubs in the 2 columns on the left, this is a combination of all the middle schools, but there was a ton of overlap. And you can see it is touching on a very diverse, all of our kids really have opportunities to find a club that fits them, where they can connect with peers that are like-minded and spend some time together socially during the week. One I was going to highlight, and I'll be fast, is the Among Us Club. So, and that's kind of similar to Fortnite, but if you have teenagers, you know Among Us. It's very popular, but bringing kids together, it brings a ton of different students together with that similar interest, where they can go into a breakout room and play a game where they're working on logic, they're problem solving together, you know, working on social skills, which we don't tell them, hey, this is great time to build your social skills, but naturally that occurs. So it's a great opportunity and offered across the middle school level.
And then I did speak to one that we were going to highlight, and this is a very short club list from Woodinville. When I went on to our website, just looking at the current number, I counted 48 clubs that are posted on our website. And when we get new students, which I registered or scheduled a student to start today, you know, us counselors, we just have kind of a list of things that we want to make sure we cover with our students to help them to, you know, show them kind of the ropes as they start to integrate into classes and the building. And so I take them on to our website and show them, you know, here are clubs. This is a great way to meet people, a great way to start to connect. And we are, you know, they are running during virtual learning. So this is just, you know, a few that we wanted to highlight that really speak to Measure 3.
All right, so highlighting with our clubs and advisory and homeroom, awesome tier 1 supports available to all of our students. We just wanted to highlight really quickly too the work that counselors have the opportunity to do with students more at a tier 2 level with smaller groups, and offering support that way, where it really focuses on specific skill building, which builds confidence and friendships and connections that students would never expect when they come to a group, you know, about managing stress. But it's exciting to be a part of that and And with that, builds their resilience as they're building these different skills and the confidence. So some of the examples pulled were a counselor connections, small group, grief and loss, managing stress and anxiety. And then the counselor that had this, she's like, we don't have a creative name, but we're the 6th grade group. So, which is really important for those 6th graders to feel connected. But this is definitely an essential support that teaches valuable tools for students with more specific needs.
Thank you. So again, I know we're basically out of time. I'm assuming that it's okay if we go a little bit over. I'm looking for some guidance here. We actually have 2 more measures.
Yes, Michael.
Yeah. I got 2 more.
Okay. All right.
Just Kendra, I just have a quick question on back to Director Cass' previous question about load and like what's your, as counselors, how many more kids do you think you're talking to, just or parents, about how their kids are doing online? And that, is it a lot more people? Are you talking to families like 5 hours a day or 2 hours a day?
That's a great question. I feel more connected with families this year, for sure. And I think part of that is Zoom, because we're not just talking on the phone, right? We can actually get on and have more of a face-to-face conversation and have stronger connection that way. And appointments, since I'm not walking through the halls or popping over to lunch and, having those opportunities to connect with kids in that way, I have more opportunities to be available to meet virtually, right, with families at different times as well. Students are still making and scheduling appointments in between classes and before and after school, and Wednesdays are like just full of student and parent meetings. So that's been a gift of time as well. I think one of the challenges is for some of our students who are having a difficult time getting them to show up to a committed meeting that, oh yeah, I'll meet with you every week at this time. And then it's not like I can just send a pass and then they come down to my office at school, right? So that's been a bit of a barrier, but in terms of opportunities to connect with families and the community and students, it's been busy.
Yeah, I'd like to hop in and tag on to what Kendra had shared. I think I'm on year 21 or 22 as a school counselor, and I can honestly say I feel like I've never worked harder. Just being a counselor during a pandemic, when people are struggling and I sometimes it's like it's a blessing and a curse. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm a counselor during a pandemic when we, at some point in time, we're all struggling, right? And, just really trying to be there for the kids and the families. And I mean, it just really, people are reaching out and asking for help. And whether it's through email or at Woodinville, we keep our Zoom rooms open, specifically at lunch for the kids. And then we just keep it open all day long, whether we're in a meeting or if we're working on, emails and responding that way, and people will just hop in. But at lunch, it's busy, it's consistent that whole hour. So people have definitely been, connecting and reaching out.
Well, thank you.
All right, this is goal 4 with the measure of increasing percentage of students with at least 95% average school attendance and at least 95% of in-class attendance. I think Michael asked me to join today because it's a data thing, but I think we can go through it relatively quickly. This is the disclaimer that you'll see up on OSPI's website. Some of the data that you'll see is missing, like the state data. OSPI didn't provide a report card as they typically do, where we would typically pull this information. Fortunately, they have other places where they put data and information. We were able to go in and grab it from those places. So we certainly have our data for last year, but we don't have state data to compare it to. But as soon as we do, we'll make sure that you have that as well. This is just a slide from last year from the report card, showing the trend data up until 2019. And then what I've done is broken it down into the categories that we've typically broken it down for you. Up at the top, you just have a definition of how it is that the state calculates attendance. On the side is a little bit more detailed. They really take the 30 days enrolled, and if a student has been absent for less than 2 times over the course of that 30 days, then they're considered to be non-absent. So it's kind of a complicated way in which they go about doing it, but that's how they end up with the 90%. I'm assuming that the 30 days is actually roughly 24 school days during that time, assuming students aren't going to school during a lot of weekends. And you'll notice at the bottom there, just so you can show how you read the chart, 2017, you've seen 2017, 18, and 19, and then 2020 data is going to be at the bottom of each of the categories.
And really quick, David, so when it says 2020, is it this 1920 school year or calendar year 2020?
It's the 1920 school year.
Thank you.
The other question that you'll probably have is, so how do we do this during a pandemic with online learning? And the state came out with guidance this year that very much mirrored what we did last year for the end of the school year starting in March. And so this is really how we were taking attendance then as well. So as you're wondering, so what did that look like for second semester? What they, yeah, you've already read that, and you could read that yourself. And then here it's broken down by each of the categories. With the in sizes at the end, what I can say while he's flipping through these is that all of the schools that are the principals that I've talked to, and I believe this to be universally true, really worked hard both last year and this year, actively seeking and trying to find those students who are absent even a day. A number of principals that are doing home visits, started that last year, continued that this year, really making every effort. I believe almost every school has specific teams that are designed specifically to connect with families, connect with parents, connect with kids, identify the reasons why they're not coming to school, and figure out how they can get them engaged. This, of course, is the Healthy Youth Survey data about skipping school.
This is the last slide in this for this measure, but Dave just kind of alluded to the work that's been going on in our schools current year to engage more students. And I think, Kat, you wanted to speak to this.
Yeah, one example that I had talked about that I felt really spoke to increasing students' attendance is our guidance team. For example, at Woodinville, every school has a team. We call it guidance team. Other schools might use the term care team, but basically we meet regularly, weekly or bi-monthly, and it includes all of the counselors, the assistant principals, the school nurse, the school psychologist. And the purpose of the meeting is really to focus on students who need extra support or that we're concerned about. And so at Woodinville, we spend a portion of our meeting, every meeting, talking about students who are not attending consistently. And especially during remote learning, you know, some students who have struggled with it, we want to make sure that we're intervening, that we're reaching out. We've done home visits. We've you know, contacted parents. We've we'll ask for an update from the teachers, like really try to break it down and problem solve, like how can we better serve and support the student to get them attending regularly? What are the barriers? is their technology working? Can we support in that way? We've made adjustments to their schedules. And so I really think, these teams have been critical, especially during online learning, that we are paying attention to our students and really tracking, the needs and reaching out to those kids who are struggling with attendance, even if it's skipping a period or two. So we also gather information for the meeting from our attendance specialists. So I think that's been a very effective model that we have stuck to, through the work of our guidance team and these teams in the buildings.
And it may be better if we went ahead and there's one more measure. We'll finish that and then see if there are some questions at the end there. So I'm going to move us along. Rick?
All right, measure 5. This is very important, as just like the rest of the measures, but this deals with making sure students have that mentor or advocate that they can confide in across our schools. And this was one of the last pictures that we had with the counseling team, so I definitely want to share that, but you could definitely move on along. So this is one of the data points that I'm looking forward to see what the difference is going to be. As you see, from 2016-18, having someone in a community that you can talk to did increase. And even as Kendra stated, we've been spending a lot of time while we've been virtual learning, connecting with our students. So unfortunately, we don't have this data for this year, but next time that we do this data point, I'd like to see that more students have someone more, either up to 85% of students in a community that they have someone to talk to.
So here, what we wanted to highlight was for measure 5, the role of the counselor and being an advocate and mentor for our students, and really being accessible and meeting all of the needs. So we follow the ASCA model, and that stands for American School Counselor Association, and they designed a K-12 program, and it designates 3 pillars. So you can see on this slide, we focus on their academic achievement. I won't go through each of the roles or tasks, and then college and career readiness and social and emotional supports, which have been so important recently. So, the counselors often are a place where a teacher, a parent, or the student will reach out and share a concern or, highlight that the student is struggling. And so really our job, our training in graduate school is to provide counseling. And so we do counseling sessions with the students. And then when we determine and assess that the student needs like a treatment plan or therapy, then we refer them. So we have given our mental health therapist, who Rick will speak to next, many referrals this year. So our job really is to assess, what supports can we put in place, what resources in our community can we connect them to, and our building, connecting the student and the parent to teachers. So with this slide, we just wanted to highlight, the role of the counselor and what support we provide. And, every year when we get close to graduation, throughout every year, high school counselors, we're constantly looking at the students' transcripts. And as we get into senior year and we're writing their letters of rec and we're tracking their progress, okay, what do they have left? I can go through every one of my students and I know them. I know them fairly well. So I think it's important having those students grades 9 through 12. We meet with every one of our students in the spring during registration to do their course planning for the next year. So making that contact with each of our students has been critical, and we're doing that across the district at the secondary level now, middle and high school. for sure. So when, you meet with a student during registration and you're not familiar with them yet, what I found is I'll be in the halls at school, or, I've made a new relationship and made that connection. And that's been a really effective way to ensure that we are connecting with each and every one of our students.
And thanks to the support of the union, the school district, and the union of school board, and in the union, we have had support of adding more elementary, middle school, and high school counselors. Based upon a collective bargaining agreement, we have been able to increase from 2019, counselors in elementary went up by 4 to 12 counselors for this school year. And next year, every school with over 500 students will have at least one counselor. At the middle school level and the high school, you'll see that the counselor to student ratios have decreased. And even next year, those ratios will be maintained. And to find additional support for our students, we've been collaborating not only with schools within the area, but even Capella University and Oregon State University to bring in counselor interns to provide more support for our students. Since, as Mrs. Lamb stated, this has been one of the busiest years in our 20 years as a counselor. So we've been bringing in extra counselor interns to help assist our counselors across the district. And I am very grateful for our partnership with Evergreen Health. We knew going into this year that mental health was going to play an important role in the work that we do with students this year. And due to the funding, we've been able to provide mental health services and therapists at the secondary level for all of our high schools and Skyview. I say Skyview because we have another grant, the SBIRT grant, which is for our middle schools and provides a therapist for our middle schools, but only our middle schools in King County. In Skyview, since it's located in Snohomish County, the funding through Evergreen Health has been beneficial of providing services with a mental health therapist at Skyview as well. And this just gives a breakdown of the hours per week that each secondary high school had a therapist last school year. And in the right, hopefully you can see, in the green areas are the increase in the number of hours that we've had support from a mental health therapist. And I just like to point out, although we'd have a decrease in the number of hours at Woodinville High School, we all think that it was a positive decrease because we went from having a school social worker to a mental health therapist, whereas the school social worker was seeing students and providing and referring them out. They now have a mental health therapist that's able to see the students on a regular basis. And this is some information that was requested earlier, kind of the breakdown of the numbers in visits that we've been tracking with our mental health therapists at the high school level. Up to February 12th, we've had a little bit over 1,100 visits by over 500 students. We keep track of the students as they're seen by race and gender. And as you see, one thing that we talk about in our counseling department says, we have 315 females that are being seen and 166 males. What are things that we can do, or how can we bring the services to the classrooms to our students to make sure that they're aware or make males more comfortable accessing mental health support? And that's where that Work to Be Well program can come into play and be helpful by talking to other students or peers and making them aware that, by acknowledging, hopefully that when you accept services from a mental health therapist, it's not saying that you are in a crisis or you have a problem. Sometimes it's there so you can intervene before the problem becomes a crisis. So we'll continue to keep this data for the remainder of the year and in years to come. But I think it's very beneficial just by able to break it down from how many students have a crisis visit, a first visit, and how many students are referred out. At our middle school level, we've maintained our hours per week thanks to our SBIRT grant. And as I pointed out, we were able to increase the number of hours from Skyview Middle School from 20 to 28 as part of the funding from that particular grant. And through the screening brief intervention program through SBIRT, these are some of the questions that are being asked to students. Students that take these surveys and they screen and they come in the yellow, if they feel harassed or they note that they've had marijuana or vaping or alcohol within the past year, if they come up as yellow, they automatically will see a counselor or therapist. And if you go into the next slide, when you see the areas that will come up as in red that are alarming to us, self-harm or suicide thoughts in the past year, they will see someone that day. And in this slide, once it's to a sound counselor, if they come up in red, they're going to see someone that day. And we've adapted our screening process this year. We wanted to focus on quality rather than quantity, and that's why we've been moving slow. Because one of the things we had to coordinate before we did this survey or with the students, we had to confirm with the parents that they will be home at the point that we give this survey to the students. We didn't feel comfortable sending a survey out and finding out that a student was in crisis a day later. So when parents agree to this, have their students do the survey, they are at home at the time of the survey so that the therapist is available, the parent is there to intervene. We review the data right away, because if we have someone come up in the red area, then we have to see them immediately. So that's something we had to adapt a little bit this year to online learning. And once again, thanks to Evergreen Health, we have been able to shift some funds. So where in previous years, we haven't had any therapists assigned to an elementary school, and we have a lot of elementary schools, but we've split time between a therapist with that Service Innovation Lab High School. And we thought what other place to start than our 4 Title I schools. And they spend 1 day at Innovation Lab and the 4 other days for a full day at some of our 4 Title I schools to provide support to those families. And our family liaisons are also additional mentors or support. Sometimes families don't feel comfortable reaching out to the school, so our family liaisons bridge that gap. Our nurses and counselors definitely work closely with families, but when families feel uncomfortable reaching out to them, we do have our family liaisons. And on the next slide, you'll see our family liaisons that are assigned to each region, just to provide additional support to our families that are not, English is not their first language. And a couple additional supports we have our students who are very good advocates, especially the students that were part of the dual language mentoring program. They're at Woodinville High School, but they support and tutor students that are at Kokanee and Wooden. Then we have our National Honor Society tutors across our high schools that provide additional support to students. And it says middle school, but it's not particularly middle school, it's throughout the whole district. We think of our educational support staff, our para-educators, our bus drivers, or even our custodians always provide a greater level of support to our students. When we think of when students do get on the bus coming to school, they meet the bus driver, the custodians are there in the morning when they have their breaks. So we try to utilize all the individuals within the district who can provide support to our students, because they're all very beneficial.
So thank you. At this time, I'm going to stop screen share. I know we're way over our allotted hour, but we just wanted to be able to share as much information as it relates to this particular goal within our strategic plan with you as possible. So thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. There's very little bit of time left here.
Would it be all right if I asked a question? And we went back to the thing here. Hang on. There we go. Thank you. That was fantastic, and I know that the work is not just limited to the people here on the screen. So thank you to all of the hard work that is going on. This was obviously an important enough issue that we created a goal, and certainly this year it's probably our most important goal of the work that we're doing. To that end, as we bring kids back into classrooms, what conversations are happening around the trauma-informed practices and the work that we're going to need to do with our students as they come out of this really horrendous year? Even, I mean, those obviously that have had losses in their homes, families have lost jobs, they've lost their homes, but even those that have the material and those that they've survived pretty well have still been pretty heavily impacted by all this. What is our thinking around prioritizing this work as we come back to in person?
I can go ahead and jump in. I'd just like to say, actually on March 3rd, we've been preparing for various levels of students when they're able to come back into school, and we're starting at like the preschool level, working with OSPI and working on training staff, starting with preschool in collaboration with the preschool principal at Sorensen, just making sure we have trainings in place in different layers for preschool, then K through 2. We didn't feel that we can just have one big social emotional training. We had to start at the lowest level and find out the various needs from the different levels, and then provide the training and support that they need, because we realize that students will be returning, but it's not going to be the same years when students return from summer break in previous years. These are students that were out and they may have experienced some type of trauma, as you mentioned, while they were out. So we need to provide and prepare educators for that. So that training is actually going to start on March 3rd.
Great, thank you.
Any other thoughts and questions before we wrap up?
No, just say thank you. We love the well, besides seeing you wonderful people, we love the information too. So the fact we had to go over, we just would rather get all this rich information and all the context, all the details. You know, it's one thing to talk about system-wide, but understanding it down to the student level, I think just takes some conversations. So thank you for putting together the information. It was really helpful.
Welcome.
I'd like to echo that very quickly. Just thank you so much. Being able to, as Director Cass said, being able to see some of the details it just helps us understand what's going on so much better. And thank you too for going over and making sure we get through all of it. I'm sure there will be other questions, but we have another meeting coming up, so we can do it then.
Great. Thanks again, everyone. Excellent information. We'll look forward to seeing the updates later. Thanks for all your time. Dr. Reed, closing remarks? Or are you?
Well done. I continue to be inspired by Michael and the team and our counselors, and just, I think this is such a critically important goal, and I have never seen our staff work harder. And it's hard because it's not as visible, and yet it's so important. So just so grateful for each of you for your work. Thank you.
All right, we'll see you next time. This meeting is now adjourned. We'll return, let's give ourselves about 5 minutes, and we'll be back for the board meeting. Bye-bye.